Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast.
Hi folks, it's Dave D here. Recently I had a live Instagram and LinkedIn chat with the brand weaver, Tim Weaver, about podcasts and breweries and how they can work together. And we thought, well, why not release the audio as a special bonus episode? So here it is.
Happy lunchtime, boys and girls. It is I, Tim, the brand weaver, branding for breweries on Instagram. And we are back. It's January 2025 and having a big old bunch of conversations to help your brewery stand out, get noticed, and grow this year. And to start the year, I am joined by the dashing, the gorgeous Dave D of Daftaboutcraft. Good afternoon, Dave.
How the tables have turned. This feels very strange. Very, very strange. Last time we spoke, I was interviewing you. Now it's the other way around.
No, you're under the spotlight, all the nitty and gritties. It's an expose on the craft beer industry and podcasting at lunchtime. It's not. It's going to be a casual chat, of course, but
I like the idea of people nibbling their lunch while they're listening to us chat away. I like that.
Yeah, the visual of a brewer just sat, in the back room, cheese and pickle sandwich, a little crust dribbling down his chin. It's a glorious vision. Well, if anyone is eating their sarnies when watching this, let me know.
Please let us know, yes.
Indeed. We have the comments function, guys and girls, so please do pop a comment or a question in if you want to ask us anything. If not, no stress. I appreciate your hands are full of sandwiches and tea right now. Let's get stuck in. Dave, for people who do not know of your wonderful work and Daftaboutcraft, sir, would you mind just giving us a bit of an intro as to who you are, what you do, and why you do it, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, I am one half of the Daftaboutcraft podcast, which began 4.5 years ago now, amazingly. We're still here after 4.5 years. We just started during lockdown, really, as something to do, me and Dave B. We worked together at the time, and we both realised we like beer, and we both realised we like talking about beer, so we thought, let's do a podcast. And we never expected it really to still be going after all this time, but somehow it is. We don't even work together anymore, but it's still going. But now we love it. And what we love is finding new breweries and telling people about those breweries, because everybody knows about the big players in the craft beer scene or the beer scene, but there's a lot of little one-man bands out there. And as the podcast has progressed, we've found that that's our niche, talking about the small guys. And we love doing it. We really do. As we're talking, I've just had a message from a little brewery called Turtlehead Brewery, who I've been chatting to. And now, who out there has heard of Turtlehead Brewery? Not many people, but they'll be on the podcast and we can shine a light on them.
Fantastic. And so why did you start the podcast? Just because you wanted something to do down, during lockdown?
Well, we weren't even furloughed, funny enough. We actually carried on with our job. So I probably just like the sound of my own voice, to be honest. And I always wanted to get into radio as a kid, and I never managed to do it. So this is like the second best thing. But definitely. Also combine it with a love of beer, and it's like two things I enjoy.
Win-win, right?
Absolutely.
Beer, being able to talk, do your radio host vibe, and you're laughing. And so the podcast platform, it is, in terms of like marketing and platforms that, brands can use to get their voice out there, it's a relatively new one. And I don't know what you think, but I really saw it skyrocket during COVID, where people had that bit more time on their hands. Do you agree?
Yeah. Every man and his dog was knocking a podcast out there. You got two guys who just like talking. They put a podcast out. They wouldn't necessarily know what it was about, but they're just, we've got a podcast now and we're going to talk about it. And I think what happened is that a lot of those podcasts have actually fallen by the wayside over the last 2 or 3 years. You've seen it with beer podcasts. A few of them have left the scene, and there's sort of a hardcore still going. But yeah, everybody was doing a podcast, almost to the point where the market was saturated in podcasts and there was too many. Yeah, there was a lot of beer ones, and I'm a bit selfish, but it's nice that a couple of them have gone by the wayside, because being quite honest, there was probably too many of them. It's a niche world, and not everybody has got time to listen to dozens of podcasts.
100%. And now the hardy survive. Those who've put the graft in, keep creating that content.
The foolhardy have survived. Yeah, we're still here. There is an appetite for it. I was looking at our stats last night, and since we started, it was July the 5th, 2020, our first episode. And since then, we've been listened to in 79 countries across the world.
That's awesome, mate.
Whether it's people who've just got VPNs and they've set them to weird places around the world, maybe that's the case. But we've been number one consistently on the hobby podcast chart in the Cayman Islands, which is mind-blowing, really. I don't know why.
You've got to find those Cayman listeners and be like, okay, send us
Look,
messages.
I'll take them wherever they are. I'll take them. But that is a weird one. Who knew there was a craft beer scene there?
But I think that's the wonderful thing. You know, I was going to ask, like, what role do you see podcast playing when it comes to helping breweries get out there? There's the obvious thing of like, you can shine a light on the little known breweries, but what are the other benefits that you see from a podcast?
We've had breweries on our podcast to talk, and they're very localized. Their beers maybe get 10, 20, 30 miles. They can come on the podcast, and there's a potential for everybody in the UK to then know about them, and further afield, they can sell their product further afield. If they've got a web shop, we can talk about the web shop, tell people about it. And if they haven't got a web shop, what we've done with quite a few breweries is link them up with a business called Tapdoor, which gives them the ability to sell through their web shop. I visited a little brewery over Christmas called 3 Words in Worcestershire, and they don't have their own web shop, but they came on the podcast. We linked them up with Tapdoor, and now they sell a fair few cans each month through Tapdoor's website.
That's fantastic, because I can imagine, that's got to be a worry. You've got breweries going, we want to raise awareness of what we do, but then if people can only come to the tap room or, like you said, a 10-mile radius, why bother? But nice, good connection.
We like to think that we can sort of help people. We obviously love drinking beer, but we want to help breweries as well. And I think we have done over the 4 years.
And you were saying, like, you've got countless different listeners from all over the globe, but how many people listen to the podcast, to Daftaboutcraft on a regular basis?
On a monthly basis, anywhere up to 700 or 800 people, which, it's not a huge amount. But if you look at the stats, which we get every year, it puts us in the top sort of 25% of podcasts, which I think tells you that there's a lot of podcasts out there that just exist and don't do much. Like we were saying before, everybody started a podcast. There's a lot of them still out there. My dog's barking in the background. They're loving it. You've got to be consistent. You've got to keep on putting episodes out there, and you will get noticed. I think a lot of people, they'll start a podcast and then not do much with it. You've got to stay focused and consistent, keep putting episodes out, and people will listen.
You're saying like it's 700 to 800 monthly listeners, and brewers might go, I can stick a Instagram story or reel out, and that gets the same thing. But I think the difference is that's 700 or 800 actively engaged listeners who want to know about new beers, want to find new beers. It's a more refined market that you're
those people are tuning in to listen to what we have to say. They're finding us. They're putting us in their ears when they go out and walk the dog, or they're on their commute or whatever. They haven't tuned in by chance. They've gone out of their way to listen to what we're saying.
100%. They want your audio gold in their ears, as it were, and they want to know about the beers. So you're saying, obviously, certain podcasts have fallen by the wayside now. Those who maybe weren't as consistent, didn't keep it up. But there's still a good amount of beer podcasts out there. What would you say is the best way, for a brewer who's going, all right, maybe I want to look into this. Maybe it might be worth my time. How do they find these podcasts? And after that, how on earth do they get in touch with people?
I think Instagram is your key. All these guys are on Instagram. And that's how you contact people. That's how we contact a lot of breweries, actually, through Instagram. And what is interesting is that we don't get many breweries contacting us and saying, hi, guys, can we come on the podcast? It's usually the other way around. We have to go to them.
What would your response be? Like, can any brewery reach out to you and go,
please do.
Yeah.
The more the better, the more the merrier. When we first started, we had to really dig hard to find people who'd come on, because we're just a couple of Herberts talking about beer. We could be anybody. But as you continue and you keep at it, people start to recognize you're putting out some decent content. They're more happy to come on and talk to you. But still, most breweries will not approach us. We have to go to them. I bet that doesn't happen in many other industries.
No, like it's almost like there's a fear. Like, I don't necessarily want you to talk about my brewery. But I can't imagine you're going to do this horrific expose and just rip into a brewery live on a podcast. It can't happen.
I've often thought it'd be nice to do some exposés in the craft beer world. There's lots of stuff that could be exposed, I'm sure, but that's not our aim with breweries. We want to help people enjoy their beer and tell people about their beer and showcase what they do. That's all we want to do. even occasionally, you might have a brewery on and you might be drinking their beers and you might not be in love with their beers. We'll still do our best to push those beers because they're putting their passion into operation here. They're doing what they love doing. And just because we don't like their beers, somebody will.
Of course. Okay, so say I was one of those brewers who go, right, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to do it. I'm going to reach out to Dave. I want to be one of the proactive ones. Do I just send the message going, hi, Dave, I work at a brewery. Please talk about us. Or what kind of stuff do you want to know? Obviously, what do you need? What do you want to kind of get in that little press pack or that intro message that you get that makes you go, let's do this, let's chat?
I want a hook, really. I want something that's interesting. I mean, we will literally talk to anyone, but if there's a hook, that's what we really want. Something interesting to draw us in. What's special about your brewery, Do you still exist in a shed at the bottom of the garden and it's a real labour of love? That's interesting. If you send me a message and say, hi, we make lots of hazy pales, can we come on and talk about them? That's not so interesting because where's the hook? Give me a hook.
That in itself can be a struggle though, right? Because I was talking to Matt Curtis last year, and he's a well-known writer in the industry, and some of these breweries don't necessarily know what does make them different. Like that, they're almost too close to the product to go, oh, that's something quite unique.
Me and you were talking off air before about, these guys in breweries, they don't have media training. They're just a one-man band, two-man band, 3 or 4 people. They don't have media training. They don't know what to say. They're not footballers with access to all this training so they know what to say and how to answer questions and how to make themselves look good. So I think what happens a lot is that they'll be scared that they're going to be pushed out of their comfort zone. So we try to keep everything really low-key and relaxed so people feel at ease, and hopefully then they'll enjoy talking to us.
And so, what are some of the best collaborations that you've been part of in terms of working with breweries and getting the best out of them and for your show?
We've done a few bonus episodes over the time, and when we do bonus episodes, it's usually because we've got so much out of an interview, there's almost too much to put into a normal episode. We spoke to Durham Brewery last year. They were celebrating 30 years in the business, and they're still only a tiny team, about 7 people. They've been going for 30 years, and it was a really engaging chat we had. So we loved it. We loved everything they got to say to us, and the beers were also amazing. So we put that into a bonus episode. So if you get into a bonus episode, you've done good. We've really liked what you had to say.
That's the sign of a good chat, that it just keeps on going, right?
Yeah, we've had some that have literally lasted for 3 hours.
Good Lord. Wow. And this is where you record it in an evening, right? I assume.
Yeah, a very long evening, like into the early hours sometimes. Editing, that's difficult.
Well, that's what I was going to say about the editing side of things. Like recording a podcast, it's not like a live chat like you and I are having right here. You have that conversation, but there's an editing process. So we go back to the idea of media training. A brewer can happily talk, and if they stumble over their words or if they go, that gets whipped out, right?
I take very great pride in editing out ers. If you and I'll get it out. Don't worry about it. It's not a problem. And a lot of guys will say to us, I stumbled over my words there. Don't worry. That will not appear on the edited podcast. It will come out. I like it to be clean and fluid. No ums, no ahs. You'll sound great.
And it's better for the listener, right? No listener wants to sit there and have to wait through an or a stumble. They want the good stuff, like blow after blow. Yeah,
we want to make people sound good, not like they don't know what they're talking about. So we will polish it and they will sound good. And, when I say we will polish it, it takes hours to edit. I mean, what we're chatting now, and when we go off, we'll press the button and go and have a cup of tea and that's it, job done. But when we've spoken to people, all that's got to be edited. So an episode, probably 8 hours to edit, like a full day's work.
And this is why I've gone the lazy route of just doing it live.
You're so lazy.
Happens, just deal with it, right?
Yeah.
No fear me, just straight in there. Okay, so we've got a bunch of beer-related podcasts out there. Is every podcast right for every brewery, or do breweries need to do a little bit of research before reaching out? What would you recommend?
A lot of podcasts, how they operate is they'll have an interview, and the interview will be the whole episode of the podcast. What we do is we have lots of different features. So a brewery could be part of one of the features. You don't necessarily have to be the main interview. We have a feature called Brew to Me, where we try beers from breweries we've never had before. And that's a great way for a little brewery to get some exposure. They don't have to come on and have a massive interview. They can just send us a little voice note, 2 or 3 minutes, and we try one of their beers and then weave that into the episode. So if you're worried about making a fool of yourself on a long interview, you can just come on Brew to me, send us a voice note. You can polish that voice note all you want and then send it to us. And so you know what will appear on the podcast. You don't have to worry about speaking to us and saying something you didn't really mean to say or whatever. And that's a lot of small breweries. That's their gateway into Daftaboutcraft. They'll come on that part of the show. It's really good for a lot of people.
Yeah, coming back to like when breweries reach out to you, the fact that they've not done a blanket kind of Instagram DM to any brewery podcast that they can find, but they've gone, "Hey Dave, really love the show. I was thinking about this particular segment and I'd love to get involved in that," or they like this particular format. I'm guessing that's going to help, and you're going to respond more favorably to someone like that versus a copy and paste, right?
Yeah, don't give me a copy and paste, please. But like I say, though, we don't get that many inquiries. It's us chasing breweries usually.
So I think that's even like one of the biggest takeaways. It's just send the message, right? It doesn't take too much time.
If you're a brewer out there and you're listening and you send us a message, we will take immediate notice because there's so few people who do that. You will stand out from the crowd immediately. There's no doubt about that.
I hope there's a couple of DMs in your inbox in the next day or so.
I hope so. When we do get messages, it's very exciting. We love it, but we just don't get that many of them. I think also because a lot of these breweries we deal with are really small, they don't have time to be sending out messages on spec to podcasts. They just don't have time. They're busy making the beer, packaging the beer, delivering it. But all it takes is a message, and it is an essential part of running a small brewery. You've got to get yourself out there.
It's so important. The idea of marketing in a brewery space. We've talked about it on your show, of course. So many brewers have this field of dreams mentality, like brew it and they will come. And it's like, no, you've got to put the effort in. You might have the best beer in the world, but if no one knows it exists, then you're going to struggle. You're going to really, really struggle. But let's talk about if there are any no-nos. Are there any mistakes that breweries might make when partnering with a podcast or things that they should avoid?
Just occasionally we'll get a guest on. My dogs are looking forward to this bit. Look, can you hear them barking?
I'm leaning in. I want to know.
Just occasionally we'll get a guest, and they can be tricky to deal with. It's like they've got their guard up and they don't want to tell us anything. So they'll go through the motions and just talk around the edges. I like to get to the nitty gritty of it. I want to ask people, what do you struggle with in your business? What's difficult? What do you enjoy? What made you love the business? Do you still love the business? If somebody isn't willing to answer those sort of questions, that is a big no-no for me. We haven't had many people like that, but just occasionally it can be a struggle when you get somebody on. You sit down, have a couple of beers, and you tell within a couple of minutes that they're going to be hard to open up if you want. And it's hard to crack that outer layer of them. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to go onto a podcast, be prepared to talk honestly about what it is you do.
And do you, I know every podcast is different, but, at Daftaboutcraft, do you let your guests know the kind of questions and things that you'll be asking ahead of time, or is it more natural and fluid?
No.
Ooh,
no. Well, this is maybe we're wrong, but sometimes people will say, have you got a list of questions? I don't know, because I don't know where the conversation's going to go to, quite frankly. And I love the idea that conversation can go anywhere. So, no. Listen to a few episodes and you'll get what I usually advise people to do. Listen to a few episodes and you'll see how we operate. Yeah. And that's what you can expect. There will be standard questions, but I never know where the conversation's going to go. And I like the fact that it can literally go anywhere. We've had people telling us about how much money they owe and really in-depth things. And that's fascinating. You wouldn't get that from people if you laid out specific questions. That insight I don't think would come, so we like to let it flow naturally.
And coming back to the editing comment, I would assume that if there were territory that you stepped into and the brewer went, I'd prefer not to talk about that particular piece, then you go, that's cool, we move on, right?
Yeah, sometimes somebody will say they'll let their guard down a little too much and they'll give us some really juicy stuff, but then they'll say, oh no, can we take that out? Of course, you have full control. We're not going to stitch anybody up. We're not about that.
Oh, are you planning on releasing like the Daftaboutcraft After Dark, where all the voices are changed and it's like the juicy bit that people used to say?
That's it, yeah. Well, you never know. It could happen now. I've often thought we should release an episode full of bloopers because there's plenty of those. Then I think, do people really care? I don't know.
I think that's my best bit about a film. Like when you get to watch to the end and there's all the bloopers, it's just like, that's brilliant. You know, it shows the human side of these wonderful people we put on pedestals. All right. So obviously you do a podcast and you have a chat for, be it 30 minutes to 3 hours, depending on how long you've talked. What can a brewery do once the podcast is done? If they want to double down on it, you know, they put the time in to work out who they want to talk to, have that chat. Like they could easily go, well, done it now. It's over to the podcast to do all the promotion and that's about it. But surely they can do more to get more from it.
Absolutely. That's a really, really interesting point. Our most listened to episode last year was one that featured Axeljack Brewery from Wales. It's no coincidence that they are probably the brewery that did the most after we'd spoken to them and promoted it heavily on their socials, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. And not just one post, but stories, all sorts. And that really engaged a lot of people and they listened to the episode. So it really does work. Equally, we spoke to another brewery called Broadtown from Swindon. And afterwards, without any pushing from ourselves, they took a bit of audio, they did a lovely animated video and put that out on their socials. And that did really well. So, I mean, you can choose to do as little or as much as you want. But obviously, the more a brewery does, the more your episode is going to get listened to, without doubt.
And I think the wonderful thing about podcasts, and especially like video interview podcasts, is there's so much repurposing that can be done from it. Like, of course, extract the audio, get little clips that you post. You got the video, so you can trim a couple of bits of the video and you've got several reels in there. But I think something that breweries don't necessarily realize is the content they start talking about is really valuable for their own channel, because if they're starting to talk about what makes the brewery different, the history, the purpose, the origin story, they can go, oh, I can talk a bit more about that now. It's almost like a bucket of ideas that will then springboard the rest of their content moving.
Absolutely. We've had breweries that they'll do a market stall and sell their cans and whatever. They'll have a little business card with details of our episodes. And so they hand those to their people who are buying their products, so people can go away and then listen to the episode to find out more about them, which is brilliant. You've just got to be active. You've got to be actively engaging with people and doing all you can. It's not just about making good beer. At the heart of it, it's about making good beer, but there is so much more. There's plenty of breweries out there that make bad beer and do well. So
yeah, it's about the marketing. It's about people knowing about it, right? That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Does it cost a lot to feature on a podcast? Do breweries pay a lot of money, or do they hand over some beers, or does it vary? How's it work?
So when we contact people, we'll say, you know, come on and talk to us. Send us a few beers. We're happy to pay. So we always offer to pay for beers. 90% of the time, a brewer will say, don't be daft. Here's some beers. I'll come on and talk to you. But we don't take anything off anybody. All we take is their time.
I mean, then surely it's a no-brainer when the idea of putting 30 quid behind a paid ad on Instagram or chatting to someone as glorious and divine as yourself for a couple of beers. I mean, that's only fair, right? Send some beers. You want to taste them. You're going to talk about them. Seems like a no-brainer to me.
So, yeah. So what usually will happen is that me and Dave B, who presents the pod with me, will get a little package in the post. Even if it's only one beer, that's fine. We don't want anything off people. Like I said before, we are just all about promoting breweries. It's what we exist for. It's what we do this for. So we'd never charge anybody to come on.
I've been talking to more and more kind of content creators on social media around the beer space. And so many of them out there are happy to do a little bit of a promo or a feature just for a few beers, you know, and these are people with an audience of 10,000, 15,000 people. And so it's like, well, if you're happy to send a couple of beers, you're laughing. Like, it doesn't have to be super expensive to get the good word of your brewery out there.
It's always a bit of a red flag to us when breweries don't want to send beers, because you kind of think, this is your product. What's going on here?
Yeah, I get that completely. So what advice would you have for a brewery then who's looking to go above and beyond? So they want to stand out. They don't just want to be the ones who send you a message, but you featured a number of breweries on the podcast now, and there've been numbers of breweries that featured on many, many podcasts. But what do you think would take a brewery to the next level where it's like, wow, that was a great guest. You know, they've really doubled down on that.
Here's a good one for you. Missing Link Brewery in Sussex. Wonderful brewery, wonderful beers. I know that now, but I didn't know it before because I hadn't really heard of them. But they invited us down to their tap room, and not only have they got a tap room, they've also got some accommodation there, some, what do you call them? Those nice huts.
Oh, the glamping pods.
Glamping pods, that's the one.
Yeah.
So they invited us down, me and my wife, and we stayed in one of their glamping pods overnight. They cooked us a meal in the tap room. The tap room was shut, but they cooked us a meal in the tap room. They gave us beers in the tap room, every beer they'd got. That is going above and beyond. And I love those guys. But not just because they did all that. That's really lovely. That was the bet. We were treated like royalty, which that's amazing. And we didn't pay for any of that. That was all provided by them. But on the back of that, I've been back to the tap room. I've stayed overnight in a glamping pod again with my family and paid. And I've bought a meal in the tap room and bought drinks and cans and everything in the tap room. So it made me invested in their business. I wanted to go back and support them because they'd shown me some consideration. And that they're lovely, lovely guys at Missing Link. If you've never been there, people watching this, get yourself there. It's a wonderful place. Their tap room is awesome. And, you know, I got a lovely tour of the brewery, got to meet their dogs and their family. It was lovely, you know, and such a personal touch, but I'll never forget that.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Like you compare that to a brewery who goes, yeah, we'd love to talk to you, but don't really want to send a beer out right now versus exactly. Come on down. Because you'll go to breweries and interview them there, right? It doesn't always have to be online.
This is what we did with Missing Link. I took the kit down, took the mics down, took the mixer down, and we sat in the tap room and we did it in there. Yeah, I don't mind. Well, I'll go anywhere. Really will.
Pay for the flights, you know.
Yeah.
Cayman Islands, that's where you want to be, right?
Well, yeah, apparently, yeah.
Dave, this has been phenomenal. And I think it's been incredibly valuable. The fact that even if breweries took a few things away, it's just like send the message, you know, listen to a few podcasts, work out who you want to talk to and reach out to them. I think that's, well, what my biggest takeaway has been. Have you got any like final words of advice before we close this off?
I think sometimes breweries might be a bit scared that they're tiny, they're nobody's interested in them. They haven't got enough of a following or whatever to feature on a podcast. No, even if you only make 100 litres of beer once a month, we're interested in you. In fact, we're more interested. The less you make, the more interested we are, in fact, because we love that. Tiny breweries just doing their thing. But they might think, we want to step this up a little bit, but how do we get people to buy our beer? How do we tell people about our beer? Those are the sort of breweries that can really benefit from being on a podcast. And we've had many, many breweries like that feature. So yeah, never think you're too small.
Dave, thank you so much for this, bud. I appreciate you taking your lunch break to come and chat to me.
That's all right. I'll send you my invoice, and if you can pay me swiftly, that'd be great.
I'll invite you to my glamping pod in the garden.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
But before we sign off, like, where can people listen to the podcast? What chats have you got coming up? You know, tell people about what you've got going on right now.
We're currently working on episode 68, which will be out at some point this month. As it's dry January, and we should give a nod to dry January, there's some wonderful no and low alcohol beers out there now. That avenue of the business has improved so much in the last few years. And we'll be finding out about that with the sober boozer who used to drink a lot of beer, had a problem with it, and then stopped drinking beer. In fact, I think he's just yesterday or today, he said on his Instagram, it's been 3 years since he last had his last alcoholic drink. He drinks exclusively no alcohol beers. So he's coming on to talk to us. Next week, we're talking to Dan from Radio City Brewery in Chelmsford. He'll be on at some point. We've got another chat lined up with Ideal Day Brewery. So that will be coming up. We've just nailed down an interview with Dark Element in Wales. Now, we had Dark Element on. This is a great example of what we were talking about, actually. Dark Element featured on our Brew to Me section. And he didn't send a voice note because he didn't want to put himself out there. He was a bit nervous about coming on a podcast, actually. But he sent his beers and they were phenomenal. They were awesome. And he's since gone on to do really well. He's just about to celebrate the brewery's first birthday. So he's agreed to come onto the podcast. This will be his first ever podcast, and he's going to do it with us, which is wonderful. But that just goes to show you, he was on Brew to Me. We had a beer. He's carried on putting beers out there. He's got the beers out to people, and now he wants to come on and talk. It's a progression, and that's what we love to see. Those are just some of the guests we've got coming up. As for where you can find us, just search for us on Google. Ask Alexa; she'll find it for you.
Don't say it too loud, you'll trigger us. Just,
Yeah.
not what I need.
And obviously we're on Instagram and Facebook and X and all the rest of it.
Brilliant stuff, mate. Well, once again, Dave, thank you so much. Everyone who's listening or will be watching this in the future or listening to this in the future, again, thank you. Really appreciate it.
No
I've been
problem.
Tim with the Brand Weaver. Everyone, rock on. Speak to you soon.
Cheers, everybody.
Daft About Craft, the craft beer podcast.